I want to respond though to your first question because I think it's on a lot of people's minds. A lot of people talked with me about it this week, which is how do you know the bus thing, or how do you know the sit-in thing, or something like that? And that's where my letting go thing on Monday night has to do with it. I don't think it's possible to know.
Yeah.
I wish sociology were that clever, or I wish political science were that smart. I don't think it's possible to know. And so I think what really pays off is to be experimental. So for example, with the Earthquake Action Team, what we're doing is experimenting. Try this, try this, try this, try this. And then what will work, what works will manifest itself. And that worked beautifully in the Civil Rights Movement. They had, this was Quaker Bayard Rustin's idea actually, to create an organization for Dr. King and his colleagues called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which would have chapters spotted throughout the South in a whole lot of urban centers. And in those various urban centers, those folks would be trying this and trying that. And the central organization, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, would be keeping an eye on what's promising, what's looking interesting. Oh, notice that one. And when it looked as though, in terms of national climate and what was going on regionally and how the issues were being framed, that one looked promising, then resources would flow to that one, which included money, publicity, and the charisma of Dr. King personally. Often he'd be sent to the north to get money first, and then and then go there, get arrested, and so on. And that would become then the thing that historians would write about is Birmingham, Alabama, the breakthrough that got the civil that forced John Kennedy against his will to deliver a Civil Rights Act, or the Selma March, which again was something. So it was a brilliant approach that Bayard was using there. Ella Baker was also part of the plan of creating that, because what it means is that we don't have to be social science Einsteins or something, or predictors of the future, because we can't really do that. But we can instead be very creative, try lots of stuff, notice what works, and put the resources and the energy, and added energy into that, so that can be the big deal. And since that's the approach that's worked best in US history, I would suggest that we do exactly that. You could even think of the Valiant 60 as having done that among early friends, because George Fox gathered this amazing, intrepid band of people, one of whom was 15 years old, sent them out, and then there they were, like a SCLC of their day, and they were doing this and doing that. So Brigitte was one of them. She'd be standing up after the sermon in that Anglican church and challenging the minister, and and Fox and the others would be watching how Brigitte is doing and everything like that. So they're watching all these different things happen here and there, and then Quaker resources would flow toward the places where the most trouble was happening, and where there seemed to be more of a chance for a breakthrough. Fox himself, of course, was a magnet, so especially when he was marched off to a castle and imprisoned in a dungeon, lots of other Quakers would head for that castle and get imprisoned with George Fox. You can see why a bunch of people acting that faithfully would have an enormous impact. And yet, it didn't depend on their knowing, their being super scientists. They were able to just be creative and be faithful, and then things worked out. So that's, I think, the way we can do with climate change.
One large, tiny follow-up question. Yesterday you talked about the voyage of the Phoenix, and how the Quakers, you had the White House attention. Was that before or after Norman Morrison had immolated himself?
I don't remember when Norman burned himself to death.
I think that was early.
Earlier?
1965.
65, then that was earlier, because the Phoenix voyages were 67 and 68.
Then I wonder if he set the stage for you, God rest his soul.
I believe what happened there, as I recall it, is that it increased the willingness of, if I could call it so, the Quaker establishment to allow a Quaker Action Group to come into being, because they realized if there were some Quakers of such tender consciences that one of them would be willing to do what Norman did, there might be others who would. And that it would be better to have an organization like the Quaker Action Group that was actually inviting people who felt that passionately to work together collectively as a community to take high-risk actions. That would be a way, way better expression of Quaker concern than to only use the conventional means of opposition to the Vietnam War and then have the occasional Norman Morrison event. That's
the
what I
impact
think
on
of.
the U.S. government.
With regard to the impact?
Norman's impact on the U.S. government. Might his death have had something to do with the orders to the 7th Fleet?
Governments are in general more influenced by collective action than by individual
Okay.
action. Now there are times, of course, when an individual action of an extreme sort can then mobilize a collective response. That's
Yeah.
happened. But that did not happen in his case, and it would, and it very often doesn't.
But again, I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. No, governments, it's very clear to me that governments are way more worried about large-scale collective responses. They figure the occasional can be written off as an aberrant individual rather than a real a power threat. Yes?
It might have happened with Horace Champney, and Lee Stern tried to do that with fasting. And they wrote continually during their long fasts to the government. That would have been a good thing to take off as a movement.
Possibly. A Thai government once fell because a very well-known Thai started an individual fast and people rallied around him. But a lot depends on who's doing the fasting, right? Alice Paul did an amazing job. Quaker Alice Paul from Moorestown monthly meeting, leading the women's suffrage movement, did an amazing job with fasting. But again, she was already, you know, the stars were aligned such that there would be quite a response to the individual. So I would definitely recommend any of you who might be inclined to fast against the Afghanistan war or something like that, get a clearness committee first and ask yourself, right? And ask yourself, would my heroic action, I'm not against heroic action obviously, but would my heroic action trigger a large-scale response, or would it just be, just evoke a lot of sympathy but not a real response? John?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And it deals with your comment that he's been
I know I'm being
abandoned.
controversial there. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you stand up?
He's been abandoned by the American voter.
Right.
Do you think this
By the way, maybe if you stood, John, and spoke in that direction as well, because it's a little hard to hear you.
the comment that you made regarding the American voter abandoning Obama, is it possible that this is abandonment by a lower social class to put him into office, and that social class at the bottom end of our society really doesn't have the organization that exists at the top end of our society, which appears to be really mobilized against Obama?
I voted for him, and I haven't done one thing for him since.
Well, I'm in the opposite. I'd do anything for it because I can read these small bits of paper that come across the wall.
And what
The
have you
labor
done?
movement has been very active.
Don't do it by yourself. You have to have support. And
On the
it's a
healthcare,
people's-
on the healthcare reform issue, where he correctly diagnosed the American public as not willing to take on the healthcare industry. Obama correctly read us as being unwilling to fight strongly enough. But those who did fight tended to be the labor movement and Acorns. Acorn, which is basically working class African American people, fought so hard that they were attacked by the right wing.
Yeah.
And sort of singled out and forced to, or at least, I mean, one of my criticisms of Obama is I think he caved too quickly on Acorn. But anyway, Acorn was, I think, thrown under the bus as a result of the right-wing attack, which was one of the things last fall when we were thinking about putting together Quaker Action Team. One of the things that was motivating us about wanting there to be a Quaker expression of nonviolent direct action with regard to climate change was the very specter of Acorn being thrown under the bus. Also Van Jones. Remember Van Jones was a White House advisor, African American from L.A.? Oakland, from Oakland. Green Jobs, the Green Jobs guy, right? And so the right wing picked him. I mean, that's what they've done for 100 years, 1,000 years, right wing, targets, right, and goes after, right? So they targeted Van Jones and went after him like crazy, and they got him, and got him discharged from the White House. And watching that happen, remembering the Joe McCarthy period, when there was a lot of excellent Quaker work standing up to the right wing, we got to thinking, we really need Quakers to be out there taking the heat. Because the Acorn is more vulnerable to attack from the right wing. Van Jones are more vulnerable than Quakers are. Let's face it. One of the things we have going for us is tremendous credibility in American society. And on some days I think, well, it's inflated. We don't really deserve all that credibility. But nevertheless, there is a credibility, right? And so when in the climate change polarization that continues to go on, and the right wing is really working on that. In stadiums in South Philly, there's a cluster of sports stadiums. Coal companies are handing out free baseball caps to the people who go to those stadiums. The baseball caps say, "Clean coal." In other words, they're working right now in the way that they worked a year and a half ago on healthcare, to try to divide the working class and to try to get the so-called Tea Party phenomenon to happen, and so on and so on, to defuse the surge for healthcare reform. That's very important to them. They want to look populist. They want to look like they're friends of the working class, even though these are multimillionaires who are orchestrating this. And so they will. So they are right now trying to polarize the climate change debate, so that they can say some of the working class people are delighted with the destruction of the planet. And then that'll get some middle class people who listen to NPR to say, see, it's all the fault of the working class people because we're so virtuous. And just appeal to middle class superiority and class bias. And please notice that there are very smart people who are setting things up right now. And that's part of their polarization strategy, is to divide the working class. Most of the working class, of course, wants a decent and fair society, and always has. Even when middle class people weren't sure, the working class people in general know what they are the ones who, day in, day out, week in, week out, work against hunger, work against poverty, and they are being set up to be divided on the climate change issue. Quaker credibility is important when particular people are targeted. We need to be out there defending people. We need to, just as we were defending communists in the early 50s. The Academy of Music in Philadelphia was filled. It still brings tears to my eyes to remember that Quakers and allies filled 3,000 seats in the Academy of Music to listen to a U.S. Communist Party leader give a lecture on Marxism as a defiance against Joe McCarthy. At the height of the Joe McCarthy period, we filled the Academy of Music saying, let's listen to the communist story. Like that. What are you going to do about it? Like that. See, isn't that our legacy? Isn't that our genius? We're not a mass organization. We're not the labor movement or something. But we do have credibility and we do have spirit. Let's invest that spirit. Let's stand beside those who are going to be targeted by the right wing while they push the U.S. toward the cliff. Let's stand beside those people and help them to stay erect so that they can fight. Yes, Karen.
I'm kind of curious. I'm relatively